With demand high for unemployment benefits, Arizona ramps up efforts to detect fraud.
They're stealing money from needy individuals and taxpayers.
Schools and nonprofits team up to bridge the digital divide.
We've been talking about flattening the curve of COVID for sure, but we want to increase the learning curve.
Plus, new leadership at the Mexican Consulate in Tucson.
I'm a career diplomat because I wanted to serve my country.
Hello and welcome to Arizona 360. I'm Lorraine Rivera. Thanks for joining us. Undoubtedly, the pandemic has upended the lives of Arizonans. The state is on track to surpass 200,000 cases. Countless students are starting off the school year at home, and more than 1 million residents rely on unemployment benefits. Since March, the Arizona Department of Economic Security has paid out almost $9 billion in aid, on average totaling more than $271 million a week. But now the department is taking a closer look at some of those payouts. We spoke to DES Director Michael Weishart about a push to combat fraudulent claims.
The pandemic unemployment program created simplicity for individuals to apply, but that simplicity also created opportunities for individuals leveraging data breaches like the historic Equifax data breach or the Target data breach or other data breaches to identify the name, social security number, address, and date of birth of individuals and then file fraudulent claims on behalf of those individuals.
What's the backlog like now? I mean, your office has had to hire other people to address the need.
Absolutely. We've hired over 1,000 individuals to do this work. Since the beginning of the pandemic, we continue to hire. There's an ongoing job posting for anybody looking for work at azstatejobs.gov. We're working through about 25 to 30,000 regular UI claims. On the pandemic unemployment side, we have about 1 million claims that we have identified as either potential or likely fraud. And so we continue to work with large technology companies to help us iterate fraud indicators that allow us to identify potentially eligible individuals. We continue to leverage information coming to us through the media, through the community, directly to the department to better understand those million claims and try to get eligible individuals paid as quickly as possible.
What's the wait time like now? What's it averaging?
For most individuals, the wait time is very, very short. They provide the information to us. The systems and structures that we put in place adjudicate their claims almost immediately. Their payment happens in a matter of days for most individuals. Unfortunately, there are a lot of folks that have very unique circumstances in the pandemic. And so, unfortunately, many of them are waiting several weeks. So if I gave you an average, it'd be a very short number because, again, we're paying 1.2 million people over $10 billion.
This is a crime, right, to apply for fraudulent claims. So is there any recourse or has anyone had to face the music on this?
This last week, we worked with California local law enforcement to bring somebody to justice. We've had an arrest in Iowa related to Arizona fraud. We continue to work cases here in Arizona to bring people to accountability for, as you put it, committing a crime, which it absolutely is. They're defrauding the government. They're stealing money from needy individuals and taxpayers, and we're going to continue to follow up on that.
So would it be fair to say you have not seen a drop in cases given that the federal government no longer is submitting that $600 a week for some people?
Yeah, so we have seen a bit of a drop from the middle of the summer, but with the expiration of the $600 began a new program, the Lost Wages Assistance Program through President Trump's executive order. It added $300 to the benefit as opposed to the former $600. Arizona was the first state to begin paying benefits, and we remain the only state in the country where individuals are receiving this extra $300.
But it is correct that Arizona did not chip in that $100 that was requested that states could do on the local level, correct?
Yes, ma'am. As most states have identified their pathway going forward, we've only seen 3 states in the country, Montana, West Virginia, and Kentucky, that are contemplating adding the extra $100. Nobody's actually done it yet. Well, all other states that have indicated their path forward are going forward with the $300. So it's pretty much universal across the country that the $300 is going to be the way that the additional benefits are distributed.
Do you have a dollar amount as to how much you think the state has paid out to fraudulent claims?
We don't have an estimate. Obviously, we're trying to prevent additional dollars from going out. If 5% of the $10 billion that we've paid out is fraud, then we're on the hook for about $500 million. So these numbers are extremely significant, which is why we're taking this so seriously, and why, unfortunately, while there is ongoing patience required in our communities and tremendous need that continues to persist, we aren't able to just unilaterally pay everybody for every claim that we receive.
You have access to the checkbook. When you look at the balance of things, how can the state recover from this sort of thing?
The way that we bounce back is that people continue to wear masks, people continue to social distance, and we get people back to work. The answer is not more unemployment insurance. The answer is not more taxpayer liability for unemployment payments. The answer is people taking this pandemic very seriously, and everybody getting an opportunity to get back to work so that we can drive economic activity in the state.
All right, Director Michael Weishart from the Arizona Department of Economic Security. Thank you.
Thanks. I appreciate your time.
Many schools are opting to keep campuses closed, creating obstacles for families who don't have the resources to pull off distance learning. With that in mind, a nonprofit in Arizona is stepping in to help students connect to their classrooms. Tony Paniagua has more.
Robert Alvarado has worked in information technology all of his professional life. While picking up lunch a few months ago in Phoenix, he overheard a conversation between two parents. They were worried about students falling behind because they lack internet access at home or can't afford their own computers.
So then I go home and my boys are online. They're not missing a beat. And that touched me. I was like, I cannot see this and let this happen. So at that time, I came to work and I told my team, I said, hey, we need to do a fundraiser. We need to help.
Alvarado is the Vice President of Information Technology at Chicanos por la Causa. CPLC is a community development organization that was established in Phoenix in 1969 and has since spread to the rest of Arizona and 4 other states. The group works in areas such as housing and economic development, and now this. Help Our Kids Connect, an impromptu program for technology assistance responding to a serious challenge during the pandemic.
Part of leadership is bringing people along with you. And so when we saw this need, we had to do something. And that's what we tell everyone. You know, there's a lot of people out there talking about the digital divide and having conversations around it, but what are you doing about it, right?
Chicanos por la Causa's fundraiser is about finding ways to provide computers to needy families. The group says there are thousands of residents who can use the help.
They are refurbished, but they do have a huge impact because they work well. They can get the students online, access to the curriculum, get the parents access to company websites where they can apply for jobs. Yeah, they may not be able to play video games on them, but they'll be able to get their homework done, get connected, and be able to do their research and projects.
19-year-old Celina Villa interns at the IT department in Phoenix. She works side by side with employees who are trying to make a difference.
You know, I knew there was people in my community who needed computers, who needed software, who needed internet, who weren't getting it. And I was like, I don't know what to do about it. And then this program came and I was like, well, this is perfect. You know, we can launch it, make it awesome, and help so many people. And I think, you know, being more and more into the program, I learned more and more about the community. I think it was a little bit intimidating at first because I was like, no way, I'm not a technology person, don't know how to do that. But, you know, love a challenge. Everyone loves a challenge.
And it is headquartered here.
Lydia Aranda is the president of CPLC in Southern Arizona. She says internet access is critical for a number of reasons in a time of COVID-19. They include remote learning and work, online job searches, the U.S. Census, and the upcoming election. Residents need reliable information.
There's a real curve. We've been talking about flattening the curve of COVID for sure, but we want to increase the learning curve and the trajectory, not just of students in school, but really parents, siblings, families, and anyone else in the home who now isn't able to physically interact. or physically exchange and communicate.
Usually students are waiting to come in.
Angel Sobrino is the principal at one of the two high schools that the CPLC operates in Tucson. He sees the need in person every day. Many people are still not connected to modern technology.
It's not reality, especially in our area. There it is very low income, and even in 2020, there's still a lot of people who do not have access to internet or any type of technology at home. It's important to know that every student has the ability to achieve great things in their life.
Organizers say this is about trying to even out the playing field. And with community donations and cooperative efforts with other groups, it's surprisingly affordable.
And it's simple. $30, can help you get computers and help bridge this gap. And then once you do that, go out and fundraise as well. And let's do this, let's bridge this gap.
So looking ahead to what's to come, we want to make sure that in our own team and in our own schools that we are becoming better experts ourselves so that we can then help the community thrive.
We're hoping that we can keep this program going on longer, that it's something that can be sustainable, because as we move forward, we see that this digital divide is not just COVID, but even when we go past this, it's going to be an ongoing issue.
In addition to technical challenges, at-home learning also carries an array of stressors that can weigh on both students and parents. For perspective, we reached out to Tricia Haynes, who specializes in behavioral health at the University of Arizona.
Right now, in virtual online schooling, kids are being tasked with things like synchronous learning, which is listening to teachers. They're also being tasked with asynchronous learning, which is learning to do work on their own. And then a lot of things are happening in breakout rooms, which are small group rooms with other students. And so if you think about it, there are two major skills that are being developed right now with online learning. One is learning to self-manage and learning to stay on task themselves. And the other thing that kids are learning, especially school-age kids, are learning how to work collaboratively in small groups more than ever before. And I think that these types of learning opportunities can actually be looked at as major life skills that can absolutely benefit us down the line.
How so? I mean, how is a 5-year-old supposed to understand that, okay, I'm doing this in the kitchen right now, mom is available if I need help, but this is going to benefit me later in life somehow?
Yeah, well, 5-year-olds are typically like more preschool age, right? So we're talking kindergarten and up. And admittedly, younger kids, it's a lot harder. So we have to be really careful about our expectations for sure, and maybe, but younger kids can still learn to self-regulate, right? So even if we're given 10 minutes of listening to the teacher, how can I support my kids in having uninterrupted, concentrated time that practices my listening skills?
Give us some ideas on how parents, we can manage ourselves differently.
Sometimes when we are overwhelmed with kids and with work, our natural tendency is to avoid and push away and spend less time with our kids because we're already so overwhelmed with our kids. But actually, if we can approach our kids and say, okay, they have a 10-minute break at school and I'm going to adjust my schedule to have that 10-minute time of break with them, then perhaps that time, and I truly believe the research supports that by giving that 10-minute a break or that 10-minute time of hands-on hands with our kids will actually save us time down the line because our kids have kind of gotten that need met of social interaction.
Do you anticipate that families, children are going to take a step back because of all this?
So I think parents have like one concern, which is academically, my kids aren't going to be standard. I think another major concern of parents is that socially, my kids aren't going to get what they need. First of all, academically, there are ways that we can compensate, but to a certain extent, maybe academic progression isn't like the top priority when it comes to social concerns right now, right? So finding ways to adjust our expectations can be key. Now, in terms of social is really complex and it's different right now. So it's easy to say my kids don't have the same social interactions, and for sure they don't. But research actually supports that online, you can still actually have a lot of social benefits from online. Screen time is not all the same. I think that there are some unique ways that kids can connect. Like for instance, maybe kids have more access to diversity in their friendship groups right now, right?
So it sounds like we should maybe perhaps lighten the expectations on our end and give ourselves, our partners, and our kids a little bit of a break because we're all managing a new stress.
Well, yeah, but I also think it goes beyond that. To be perfectly honest, I think that, Generation X was raised during the Cold War generation. I remember going to schools and going through nuclear testing, nuclear war raids in the hallways, right? And everybody at that time was like, how is this affecting the mental health and the psyche of our kids? And what we have since determined in that generation is that it has led to creativity. We were the latchkey kids. It's led to resiliency. It's led to innovation and entrepreneurial skills. So I guess my point being is that just because it's really difficult right now, that does not mean that on the other side, we won't develop new skills and new ways of overcoming things. One example is that my child's teacher actually said, your children, and she's in 4th grade, your children are going to be technological geniuses. And frankly, I kind of agree with her, right? So we have to kind of start looking that even though it's difficult, that doesn't mean that our kids are behind. In fact, in some ways, they might really become ahead.
All right, some positive thoughts there from Dr. Tricia Haynes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Over the last year, Mexico has twice reassigned the top diplomat to its consulate in Tucson, a pillar in southern Arizona for Mexican nationals in Pima and Pinal counties. This week, I sat down with incoming consul Ricardo Barceló Durazo, a career diplomat new to this type of role. We discussed the pandemic's impact on services and greater relations between Mexico and Arizona. What would you say the need is here serving Mexicans who live in southern Arizona and primarily Pima County?
Our consular work here, it's very diverse because our community here is very diverse. First, we have a thriving community here, socially, economically, very well integrated. And that community might need some services, for instance, some documents, the ability or do some notary acts that they need for their business back in Mexico. And that is very important. But we also are part of a very dangerous and risky migratory route. And so people who are here trying to do that migration, sometimes they present a lot of damages when they come here, and they are in very vulnerable situation. So I would say that we need to compartmentalize the services that we provide here, and at the same time taking advantage of all the good spirit that we have found traditionally in Tucson, because there are a lot of very strong alliances. So with all these alliances, we can actually provide different services.
How has the pandemic affected Mexican nationals who live here in this region, but also individuals who have dual citizenship? I mean, there are restrictions at the ports of entry that limit their travel.
Exactly, that's a very important part, because the borders, you might know, since March 20 has been closed for non-essential trips. But non-essential trips might mean that you are not able to see your mother, your father, your grandparents that are living across the border. So I think for our health needs, for our emotional welfare, that has affected a part of our communities, especially for those who have this very active binational life.
Economically and health-wise, the pandemic has had an impact on the state of Sonora, where you are from. It's a state of about 3,027,000 confirmed coronavirus cases thus far. How has that challenged the state that's immediately south of Arizona?
A lot of our communities on the border depend on the crossing of people from one side or the other. It's like it is estimated that only Sonorans spend $1 billion in Tucson by the year. And that has not been possible right now because shopping is not part of the essential activities. So for the communities here in the U.S., that has been a challenge. Of course, on the other side of the border, it is the same, like tourism and family visits and a lot of economic activities in the border towns have been actually very restricted.
In your opinion, are Americans taking the virus seriously enough because they continue to travel? Many Americans continue to visit places in Sonora.
Yes, there has been an influx of people who can actually, and they are going to be allowed to Mexico, and they are going to be allowed back to the U.S. I think it is important for us to really have the judgment to say that we can actually risk our families or our communities by crossing the border. Of course, we have sometimes essential trips to do, and it's important that we follow the suggestions of the authorities. And there's still more that we can do, and to be more strict because of the circumstances require us to be more strict right now. Yeah.
And finally, Consul, what would you like people to know about you and your role serving the Mexican community here in this region moving forward?
We want to have, and we will have, because that's the instruction of our president, like to have an open door and it's a human face to the services we provide. And what I want to know is, like, for all the Mexican nationals and also for the Mexican American communities in Pima and Pinal counties, that we want to improve those relationships. We want to serve you better, and we are here to do that. It's not just because I want to do it, it's because it's my obligation, but it is also my pleasure. I'm a career diplomat because I wanted to serve my country through the interests of their nationals, and I am here with the privilege of being able to do so.
Okay, Consul Barceló Durazo, thank you.
Thank you, Lorraine, and un saludo for everyone.
Despite current restrictions at the U.S.-Mexico border, Arizona's so-called beach is open. While essential travel does not include tourism-related trips, Rocky Point welcomed back visitors this month. We learn more about the conditions of that agreement from Kendall Blust, reporting from Hermosillo for KJZZ Radio. I spoke to her from my home.
There are still restrictions, these binational restrictions at the border that both Mexico and the United States have agreed to. They have been extended the most recent time until September 21st. If they're not extended again, that'll put us at 6 months since they first went into place. One of the things that's been an issue, though, is that for Mexico, there's been very little enforcement. So for southbound restrictions, there hasn't been much enforcement. And then for northbound crossers, the U.S. can't keep out essentially people who are U.S. citizens or legal permanent residents. So whether or not they have an essential reason, those people are being allowed to cross into the United States. And that's caused a lot of consternation for some leaders. The U.S. ambassador here in Mexico has continually put out statements and tweeted that he's frustrated with how many U.S. citizens are crossing the border, asking them to stop crossing if it's not for a reason that's been deemed essential. And U.S. Customs and Border Protection has actually started slowing traffic, basically, because they want to, what they've said, make people think twice about crossing and prevent the spread of coronavirus, after doing a survey of, they say, 100,000 people, and finding that more than 60% of U.S. citizens crossing were not crossing for what's considered an essential reason.
So this is a bit of a double-edged sword because Mexico, Sonora specifically, really relies on tourism. The citizens, as you noted, aren't particularly thrilled, but they need the American dollars. So what's the situation like in places like Rocky Point?
Right. Yes, this is a really interesting situation. Rocky Point is telling people to come. It shut down practically completely at the beginning of the pandemic, basically always with this plan in mind of being able to eventually reopen and reactivate its economy, which depends nearly entirely on tourism and mostly from people who come from Arizona. Tourism officials this week said there have been 50,000 visitors since the beginning of August, bringing about $2 million worth of revenue. And they expect that over Labor Day weekend, they'll have probably another 20,000 people coming to visit. And again, they're welcoming that. 80% of businesses rely on tourism, and they'll already see a huge cut in revenue this year because of the pandemic, but they're trying to recuperate that as much as possible. Like you mentioned, there have been some issues with that. Again, Rocky Point had reopened and was telling people to come down over 4th of July, which was a time they expected to recoup a lot of this lost revenue. But the Sonoran governor had initially put restrictions in place for all ports of entry, saying we're not going to allow US tourists into Sonora right now. Both states were experiencing high rates of infection, but she made an exception for the Lupil-Sonoita crossing, and that caused a lot of issues with people who live in Sonoita, which is, a fairly small but with a significant population, and where people cross to go to Rocky Point. And citizens there protested, they put up blockades, they themselves were turning back tourists over the 4th of July weekend, and then since then have continued protesting and have continued petitioning their government essentially for health resources that they say they need and aren't getting, at the same time that the government's making special exceptions for places like Rocky Point to allow tourists to visit.
Early on in the pandemic, we saw these sanitizing tunnels where the Mexican government was spraying entrance with biozinc. Is that still continuing?
There are still sanitation tunnels in certain places. Some of them are at the border, and these aren't federally implemented. They aren't put in by Mexican customs, for example. They're usually installed by city governments or even by private institutions. And so some of those, as you've mentioned, have been at the border. Rocky Point has some of those. And right now they had been at a checkpoint at the entrance to the city, but they've moved them now to the entrances to beaches. And the idea is, of course, to clean people and to kill the virus, but health experts have really said that that's probably not effective and could even be harmful.
Do you get the sense that this is being handled? I mean, you have nearly 2,500 deaths, or just more than 2,500 deaths in the state of Sonora. What is your reporting telling you? Are people feeling confident that this situation is under control?
Well, in recent days, we've seen some positive indicators. Hospital occupancy has gone down. A couple of weeks ago, for the first time in months, there were daily reported death tolls of single digits. But there are also issues of high testing positivity rates still. And health officials are saying there may be some positive signs, but this definitely isn't over. People should not let their guard down. We're very much still in the midst of a critical moment in the pandemic here.
Okay, Kendall Bless joining us from Hermosillo. She is from KJZZ Radio. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Lorraine.
That's all for now. Thanks for joining us. To get in touch, visit us on social media or send an email to Arizona360@azpm.org and let us know what you think. We'll see you next week.